She was meant to be left to die. A human soldier kept the alien queen alive. The battlefield was a symphony of chaos. Explosions echoed through the skies as gunfire crackled across the war-torn landscape. Sergeant Lucas Hale ducked behind a shattered column of alien stone, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burnt metal. His heart raced in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins like wildfire. He had seen too much death, too much destruction, and yet he felt nothing. He was numb. Lucas was part of the Earth military, one of the soldiers who fought to protect humanity from the alien empire that had invaded their world. The war had lasted for years, and both sides had suffered immense losses. Earth cities had been reduced to rubble, and the alien forces had faced the full might of humanity's resistance. It was a brutal conflict, one that had cost billions of lives, and Lucas was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the endless violence, but there was no end in sight. His orders were simple: fight, survive, repeat. As Lucas peeked out from behind the stone column, he saw the alien queen's ship in the distance. Her name was Rhynia, a powerful leader of the alien forces. Her people had destroyed countless human colonies, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. The humans had managed to push back, but the aliens were not going to give up easily. And Rhynia, the queen, was the symbol of their unyielding will. The battle raged on as Lucas's team moved forward, their weapons blazing. The humans had the upper hand, but the alien forces were not giving up without a fight. The air was filled with the sounds of combat, the roar of engines, and the hum of energy shields. Lucas's mission was clear: eliminate the enemy forces and take control of the battlefield. But as they advanced, a strange thought crept into his mind. Rhynia, the alien queen, was no longer a mere target for destruction. He had seen her from a distance before, tall, regal, and commanding. There was something about her that made Lucas hesitate. Was it her strength, her intelligence? Or was it just the fact that she was a living being just like him? Lucas shook his head, pushing the thought aside. This was war, and there was no room for mercy. He had seen what the aliens did to humans. He had watched as entire cities were wiped out in a single night, their inhabitants slaughtered without a second thought. This wasn't about compassion, it was about survival. The aliens had come to Earth to destroy them, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goal. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his commanding officer, Colonel Matthews, crackling through his comm device. "Sergeant Hale, get to the front. We need to take that ship down." Lucas didn't hesitate. He moved out, his rifle raised, leading the charge as they pressed toward the alien ship. His team followed closely behind, moving with military precision. But as they neared the Queen's vessel, something unexpected happened. A loud explosion rang out and the ship shuddered. The ground beneath their feet trembled and Lucas stumbled, barely catching himself. "What the hell was that?" one of the soldiers shouted, looking around in confusion. The Queen's ship was in flames, smoke billowing from its hull as it plummeted toward the ground. Lucas's heart skipped a beat as he realized what had happened. The Queen's ship was going down and she was still on board. "Is she alive?" Lucas muttered to himself, not fully understanding why the thought bothered him. He had been trained to view the enemy as nothing more than targets, but something in the back of his mind told him that this was different. Without thinking, he broke from his squad and sprinted toward the wreckage. His mind raced with conflicting emotions. He had been ordered to destroy the alien leadership, to wipe them out, but now he wasn't sure. The Queen's survival would mean another wave of retaliation from her people. They would come for Earth with even more force, but Lucas couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something more to this than just war. Was it possible that the alien queen wasn't the monster he had been led to believe? As Lucas reached the crash site, he saw the wreckage of the ship smoldering in the dirt. His pulse quickened as he approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of life. His squad was a few hundred meters behind, still securing the battlefield, but Lucas didn't care. He had to know if the queen was alive, and then he saw her. The alien queen was lying motionless in the dirt, her armor torn and battered. Dark alien blood leaked from a wound in her side. Her once mighty form seemed so fragile now, so vulnerable. She was beautiful in a way. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, her features sharp and regal even in her weakened state. She was a symbol of power, a ruler of an empire that had brought Earth to its knees, but now she was just another casualty of war. Lucas hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. His training told him to finish the job to eliminate the threat. But as he looked down at the queen lying there in front of him, something inside him shifted. He couldn't bring himself to kill her. Not like this. Not when she was helpless. A voice in his head told him that it was madness. He had seen what the aliens had done to his people. He had watched as entire families were wiped out, as children were torn from their homes, as humanity was pushed to the brink of extinction. Yet here he was, staring down at the queen of those same monsters, unable to do what he had been trained to do. Without thinking, Lucas knelt beside the queen. He had no medical training, no real idea of how to save her, but he couldn't just leave her here to die. It went against everything he had been taught, but he couldn't ignore the voice in his heart that told him it wasn't right. He carefully checked her wounds, his hands trembling as he tried to assess the damage. The queen's breath was shallow, her body cold to the touch. She was dying, but there was still a chance. Lucas knew that if he didn't act quickly, she would be gone forever. Taking a deep breath, Lucas made his decision. He activated his comm device. "Colonel Matthews, this is Sergeant Hale. I have the queen. She's alive, but she needs medical attention. I'm bringing her in." There was a long pause before the colonel's voice came through, cold and calculating. "Negative, Hale. She's an enemy combatant. You're to leave her there and return to the front. Do you understand?" Lucas clenched his jaw. "I understand, sir, but I'm not leaving her behind. I'm bringing her back with me. You can deal with it when I get there." The comm device fell silent as the colonel processed his words. Lucas didn't wait for a response. He stood up, carefully lifting the queen into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but he managed to carry her toward the ship's wreckage. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know what kind of consequences he would face for disobeying orders. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let her die, not like this. And so, Sergeant Lucas Hale made the most difficult decision of his life. He saved the alien queen, and in doing so, he unknowingly set the stage for a conflict that would change the future of both humans and aliens forever. Lucas Hale had never been more certain of a decision in his life. As he carried Queen Rhaenia's limp body through the war-torn landscape, he wasn't thinking about the consequences. He wasn't thinking about the mission he had been sent to complete or the orders he had been given. All that mattered was that she was alive, and he couldn't leave her behind. He made it back to the human camp just as the rest of his team was securing the perimeter. His squad mates glanced at him, confused and unsettled by the sight of the alien queen in his arms. Her once regal armor was now torn and scorched, and her face was pale, her breath shallow and uneven. The soldiers didn't know what to make of it. Some stared in disbelief, while others whispered amongst themselves. But it wasn't their reaction that concerned Lucas. It was the orders he was about to receive. "Sergeant Hale!" Colonel Matthews's voice cut through the air like a blade. Lucas turned to face his commanding officer, whose expression was a mix of anger and disbelief. Matthews's eyes narrowed as he saw the alien queen in Lucas's arms. "What is this, Hale?" "She's alive, sir. I couldn't just leave her to die. She needs medical attention," Lucas replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "You've disobeyed direct orders, Sergeant," Matthews said coldly. "You were told to leave her there. She's the enemy, Hale. You can't just bring her back here like a prisoner of war." "I couldn't leave her," Lucas repeated, his voice firm. "She was wounded, helpless. I did what I had to do." Matthews was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Lucas. The tension between them was thick, and Lucas could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He knew the risks. He knew the consequences of defying orders. But he also knew that if he had left Rhaenyra behind, he wouldn't have been able to live with himself. "You'll regret this, Hale," Matthews finally said, his voice low and controlled. "We'll deal with this later. Get her to medical, now." Lucas didn't say anything in response. He just nodded and turned to walk toward the medical tent. He didn't want to hear the anger in Matthews's voice. He didn't want to deal with the consequences of his actions. All he wanted was to make sure Rhaenyra survived. The medical team worked quickly, carefully examining the queen's wounds and stabilizing her condition. Lucas stood in the background, watching as they worked. His mind was racing. What had he just done? Had he made a mistake? He had broken every rule he'd ever been taught, and for what? A wounded enemy, a queen who had led an invasion against his people. But as he looked at her lying unconscious on the operating table, something deep inside him told him he had made the right choice. There was more to this war than just killing the enemy. There were lives at stake, And even though Rania was the leader of the alien forces, she was still a living being. She wasn't some faceless monster. As the hours passed, Lucas found himself growing more and more anxious. He couldn't leave her side, even though he knew he should. He had other responsibilities, his team needed him, and the war was far from over. But something about Rania's presence, even in her unconscious state, made him feel like he had to stay. Finally, as the sun set, the medical team finished their work. Rania's condition had stabilized. She was still unconscious, but she was alive. The doctors told Lucas that she would need more time to recover, but they were optimistic about her chances. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was mixed with an uncomfortable feeling of uncertainty. He had saved her. But what did that mean for him, for humanity, and for the war? Could one act of mercy change everything? Lucas couldn't stop thinking about what he had done. In his mind, he replayed the moment he had found Rania on the battlefield, her body broken and bleeding. He had felt an instinct to protect her, to help her, despite everything she represented. She had been the enemy, the one responsible for the deaths of so many of his comrades, yet he couldn't bring himself to kill her. The thought of her suffering alone had been too much to bear. As he stood in the medical tent, lost in his thoughts, a voice interrupted his reverie. "She's awake." Lucas turned to see Lieutenant Hannah Richards standing in the doorway. She was a member of his team, a skilled medic who had been part of the squad for years. Her expression was serious, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes as she looked at him. "Is she?" Lucas began, but Hannah nodded. "She's conscious, still weak, but she's aware of her surroundings." Lucas took a deep breath. It was time to face the consequences of his decision. He had no idea what to expect when he went in to speak with her. Would she see him as a traitor? Would she try to kill him, or would she be grateful for his help? He had no answers, only the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He walked into the small room where Rania lay, still hooked up to medical equipment. She looked different up close, her alien features more striking than ever. Her skin was a shade of greenish blue, her eyes large and filled with an intelligence that seemed almost unnerving. Despite the harshness of the war, there was a grace to her, an undeniable dignity. As Lucas approached the bed, her eyes flickered open. She stared at him for a long moment, her gaze intense and calculating. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick with tension. "Why did you save me?" Rania's voice was weak but clear. It was a question that Lucas had been asking himself since the moment he had carried her to safety. "I couldn't just leave you to die," he replied quietly. "I don't know why. Maybe it was the right thing to do. Maybe it was, but I couldn't turn my back on you." Rania's eyes softened, though her expression remained guarded. "You risked your life for me, a queen of the alien invaders. You defied your commander's orders, broke the rules of your people. Why?" Lucas paused, searching for the right words. "Because I don't believe in blind hatred. I don't believe in just killing without reason. You're not just an enemy, you're a person too. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I feel." For a long time, Rania didn't say anything. She just watched him, her alien eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the human before her. Finally, she spoke again. "You humans are strange," she said softly, almost as if to herself. "You fight with such passion, yet you also show mercy. You are unpredictable. It is both your strength and your weakness." Lucas didn't know how to respond to that. She was right, in a way. Humanity was unpredictable, and maybe that was what set them apart from the alien forces. Maybe that was why, in the end, they had a chance at surviving this war. "I didn't want to kill you," Lucas said quietly. "I don't want to kill anyone, I just want it to stop. I want peace." Rania studied him for a moment longer, then slowly nodded. "Perhaps, Sergeant Hale, there is more to your people than I thought. Perhaps in your mercy, you have given me a reason to reconsider." Lucas didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The war was far from over, but a new chapter had begun. A chapter where mercy, not just might, could shape the fate of both their worlds. Lucas had barely slept in the days that followed. The camp was quiet, but there was a tension in the air, thick enough to choke anyone who tried to breathe easy. The decision to save Queen Rania had thrown everything off course. He could feel it in every look his comrades gave him, in the hushed conversations that stopped the moment he walked into the room. He didn't care, or at least he tried not to. He had done what he thought was right, and now there was no turning back. He spent most of his time in the medical tent, watching over the Queen as she recovered. Rhaenia's condition had improved, but her body was still weak from the injuries she'd suffered. She didn't speak much, only answering when spoken to, her alien eyes filled with an unreadable depth. Lucas couldn't help but feel a growing respect for her. She was no longer the cold, distant ruler he had been taught to hate. She was a person like him, with fears, hopes, and struggles. But that didn't change the fact that she was the enemy. She had led the invasion that had nearly destroyed his planet. She was a symbol of everything that had torn his world apart, and yet Lucas couldn't bring himself to treat her like an enemy. He couldn't explain it. All he knew was that he felt a connection to her, something that went beyond the battle lines they were forced to draw. As the days passed, word spread through the camp about Rhaenia's survival. The rumors varied. Some said she had been captured and was being kept alive for interrogation. Others claimed that Lucas had gone rogue, that he had betrayed humanity's cause by saving a leader of the alien empire. The whispers were growing louder, and Lucas could feel the pressure building. One evening, Colonel Matthews called him into his office. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke. Matthews sat behind his desk, eyes hard as stone, his fingers tapping impatiently on the surface. Lucas stood at attention, but he could tell that the colonel wasn't interested in formalities. "Sit down, Sergeant," Matthews ordered, his voice cold. Lucas took a seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this conversation was coming, and he had no idea how it would end. Matthews had made his disapproval clear, but there was a new edge to his voice now, something darker. "You've caused quite a stir, Hale," Matthews began, his tone cutting through the silence. "Saving the Queen, you're lucky I didn't have you thrown in front of a firing squad for that stunt." Lucas clenched his fists, but he didn't say anything. He had made his choice, and he wasn't going to back down now. "I've been getting reports from command. Some of the higher-ups are asking questions about you. About her," Matthews continued, his gaze fixed on Lucas. "They want her dead, Hale. They want to end this thing once and for all, and they see you as a problem, a weakness." Lucas swallowed hard. He knew what Matthews was implying. There were factions within the human military who believed that sparing Rhaenia had been a mistake. That one act of mercy had turned him into a liability, someone who could no longer be trusted to carry out the mission. "What do you want me to do, sir?" Lucas asked quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Should I kill her? Should I just finish the job and make sure she never gets up again?" Matthews looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "That's what the brass wants." "But you're not going to do that, are you? You've crossed a line, Hale. You've decided that the enemy is worth saving. You've chosen sides." Lucas felt the weight of Matthews's words, but he didn't back down. "I haven't chosen sides, Colonel. I've chosen to do what's right." Matthews leaned back in his chair, his fingers still tapping the desk. "I don't know if that's courage or stupidity, but I'm not going to force you to change your mind. Not yet. But I'll tell you this, if you think this war is going to end with her sitting pretty in a medical tent while humanity gets wiped out, you're wrong." "I don't want that," Lucas replied, his voice tight. "I don't want anyone to suffer, not the humans, not the aliens." Matthews exhaled sharply, his gaze intense. "You've got a lot of idealism in you, Hale, but when it comes down to it, you'll see that the only way to survive is to eliminate the enemy. You've seen the destruction they've caused. They don't want peace. They want total domination." "I don't believe that, not all of them," Lucas said, his words firm. "Rhaenia doesn't want destruction. She didn't start this war." Matthews's eyes flashed with anger. "She's the queen of the aliens. She's responsible for the deaths of thousands." "What more do you need to see, Hale? You can't save everyone." Lucas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't save everyone, but I can try to make a difference, and right now that difference is making sure Rhaenia doesn't die. She has a choice, and if she's willing to make peace, then maybe we can end this war before it destroys us both." Matthews didn't respond immediately. He just stared at Lucas for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but dangerous. "You've got a week, 1 week to make this work. If you can convince her to negotiate a peace treaty with us, maybe you'll get the support you need. But if you fail, Hale, then you'll be responsible for whatever happens next." Lucas nodded slowly, feeling the weight of Matthews's words sink in. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, but he couldn't back down. Not now. He turned and left the room, the door slamming shut behind him. Outside, the camp was alive with activity, but Lucas felt as if he was walking through a fog. His mind was a whirl of thoughts and emotions, each one louder than the last. There was no easy answer, no simple path to peace, but somehow he had to find a way. The next few days were a blur. Lucas spent most of his time with Rainia, trying to understand her, trying to find common ground. They spoke in quiet tones, the conversation always shifting between their cultures, their beliefs, and their fears. Rainia was a skilled diplomat, a queen who had seen both the triumphs and failures of her people. She had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and she was tired of the endless fighting, the endless bloodshed. "I didn't want this war," Rainia told Lucas one night, her voice soft but firm. "My people were driven to it by those who believed we could conquer all. I never believed in such a future, but I had no choice. I had to lead them." Lucas listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "And now I see the consequences of that choice. I see the destruction we've caused, and I wonder if there's any way to undo it," she said, her eyes distant. "I wonder if it's too late for us to change." Lucas didn't have the answers she was looking for. He didn't have a clear path to peace, but he knew one thing for sure. There was more to this war than just winning or losing. There was a chance for something better if they were both willing to reach for it. But as the days passed, Lucas felt the pressure mounting. He had 1 week to convince the Queen to speak with humanity's leaders, to agree to a truce that could end the war. 1 week to prove that mercy wasn't a weakness, that peace was still possible. He didn't know if he could do it, but he had to try. The days had stretched into a tense silence, broken only by the hushed conversations and cautious glances that followed Lucas wherever he went. The pressure was mounting. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. But every time he looked at Queen Rainia lying on the medical bed, he saw the weight of the decision they were both facing. Lucas knew there was no turning back. The Queen was awake now, stronger but still fragile. Every moment she spent in the human camp brought more danger. His comrades watched him with growing suspicion, and higher-ups were pressing for answers. Command wanted her gone, eliminated before she became a symbol of humanity's weakness. But Lucas couldn't bring himself to follow those orders. He had made a promise, both to himself and to Rainia. He had promised to help her. And as much as it terrified him, he wasn't going to stop now, not when peace was still a possibility. Rainia wasn't an enemy in his eyes anymore, not just a queen, not just a symbol of the alien forces. She was a person. A leader trapped by her own empire, struggling to do what she thought was right. And maybe, just maybe, she could be the key to ending this war. The sounds of the camp were familiar. The muffled voices of soldiers, the low hum of machinery, the clatter of boots on the ground. But there was a new sound now, one that Lucas couldn't ignore, the sharp, warning whistle of an incoming transmission. He glanced over at the communications tent, where an officer was waving frantically at him. "Sergeant Hale," the officer's voice echoed through the comms. "You need to come to the command center. Now." Lucas's stomach dropped. It was bad. He could tell from the urgency in the officer's tone. Without another thought, he turned on his heel and rushed toward the command center. Inside, Colonel Matthews was standing by the map table, a flicker of concern in his eyes as he looked at Lucas. The colonel wasn't the type to show weakness, but this time there was no hiding it. His expression was grim, his mouth set in a hard line. "You need to see this," Matthews said, stepping aside to make room at the table. He gestured toward a large display screen showing images of the alien fleet, massive and foreboding, hanging in space above a distant planet. "The rebellion has begun." Lucas felt his heart race. The images on the screen were unmistakable. Alien ships, once allies of the Queen's people, now turned against her. They were moving fast, heading toward the human colonies. The rebellion was real, and it was coming for them. "They're attacking us," Lucas said, his voice tight with disbelief. "But why? What triggered this?" "The Queen's survival, Hale," Matthews said, his voice low. "The moment word spread that Rainia was alive, factions within the Empire began to rally around her. Some saw it as a chance to restore the Empire to its former glory. Others want her dead. She's become a symbol of rebellion, and now they want to destroy everything she's worked for." Lucas's mind raced. This wasn't just about one queen anymore. This was about an entire empire in chaos. A fractured system that was now tearing itself apart and dragging everyone with it. "Where's Rainia?" Lucas asked, his voice suddenly urgent. "She's in medical, just as you asked," Matthews replied, his eyes narrowing. "But you need to understand something. She may not be the leader of this rebellion, but she's still its figurehead. And if she doesn't act soon, those rebels are going to tear us apart. The tension in Lucas's chest tightened. The stakes were higher than ever. He had tried to offer peace, but now he was caught in a battle that wasn't just about saving Rhaenyra. It was about saving everyone, his people, her people, and the fragile chance for peace they both had. "Do you want to win this war, Hale?" Matthews asked, his voice low and serious. Lucas didn't hesitate. "I want peace. I don't care about winning. I care about ending the violence." Matthews's eyes flickered for a moment as if weighing Lucas's words. Then he gave a sharp nod. "Then you'll have to convince her. We can't sit idly by while her empire tears itself apart. We need her to act. She needs to lead. If she doesn't, we'll be forced to do it for her." Lucas's heart pounded as the full weight of the situation hit him. There was no time left. Rhaenyra had to choose. Would she stand with humanity, or would she watch as her empire destroyed everything she had once fought to protect? He turned and left the command center, heading back to the medical tent where Rhaenyra was resting. His thoughts were a whirlwind. He had never imagined things would get so complicated. Saving the queen had seemed like the right thing to do, but now it felt like a game of survival, not just for him, but for everyone. When he entered the tent, Rhaenyra was sitting up in bed, her posture regal as ever, though her eyes held the weight of a woman who had seen too much. She looked up as Lucas approached, her gaze piercing as though she had been waiting for him. "The rebellion has begun," Lucas said without preamble. "The factions in your empire, those who want to see you dead, they've taken action. They're coming for us, for everyone." Rhaenyra's expression was unreadable, but her eyes darkened slightly. "I knew this day would come. But I didn't expect it to happen so soon." "You have to lead them, Rhaenyra," Lucas said urgently. "Your people are torn, and the only way to stop the rebellion is for you to step forward. You're the queen. You can unite them." She shook her head slowly. "I've never been the ruler they wanted me to be. I've always fought against the idea of war, against conquest. But there are others who believe that our empire can rise again. They won't stop until they've crushed the humans and taken everything for themselves." "But you can stop them," Lucas insisted, stepping closer. "You're the only one who can. Your survival has already sparked this movement. Now you need to lead it, lead your people to peace. If you don't, this war will never end. It will consume both of our worlds." Rhaenyra was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting toward the window, where the distant stars flickered like pinpricks in the endless black. Lucas could see the conflict in her eyes, the burden of leadership she had never asked for, but now could not escape. "I never wanted this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to be the queen of a dying empire. I wanted to be something more." Lucas didn't know what to say to that. All he knew was that if she didn't take charge, everything they had fought for, everything they had hoped for would be lost. The rebellion wouldn't stop, the war would rage on, and Rhaenyra's people would never know peace. "We can still change this," Lucas said, his voice steady. "But you have to choose. You have to decide if you want to be the queen of war or the queen of peace." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. "I'll do it," Rhaenyra said softly, her voice heavy with resolve. "I will lead them. I will do what I must to stop the bloodshed." Lucas felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't the end of the war, but it was the first step toward peace. Rhaenyra was willing to fight for it, just as he had. They both knew the road ahead would be difficult, and the rebellion would not be easily quelled. But for the first time, Lucas felt like there was hope. The war wasn't over, not yet. But it had taken a turn, one that Lucas hadn't expected, but one he was willing to face. Together, they would fight for peace. The next few days were a blur of constant movement. Lucas barely slept, the weight of his decisions heavy on his shoulders. Rhaenyra had agreed to step forward, to take the lead and unite the fractured alien empire. But even with her declaration, things were far from certain. The rebellion was growing stronger by the hour, and every passing minute brought them closer to an all-out war. Rhaenyra's decision to take charge was only the beginning. Lucas knew what he had to do. They couldn't afford to wait for the rebellion to escalate further. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, and if they didn't act quickly, everything they had worked for would be lost. He had been right about one thing: the war had never been about defeating the enemy. It was about survival, about finding a way to end the violence before it consumed them all. Rhaenyra was more determined than ever, but she was also exhausted. The burden of leadership had always weighed heavily on her, and now it was more than just a responsibility. It was a battle in itself. Her people, once united under her rule, were now divided. Some factions refused to accept her as the true leader, while others saw her as a symbol of rebellion, someone who could lead them to a new future. But there was still doubt, still uncertainty about whether she could really bring peace. "I didn't ask for this," Rania said one evening, her voice weary as she stared out the window of their temporary headquarters. "I never wanted to be a ruler. I wanted to live freely. I wanted to see my people live in peace." Lucas sat across from her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He understood that feeling all too well. They had both been caught in the middle of a war that neither of them had started, neither of them had wanted. But now there was no turning back. They had to fight for the future, even if it meant making sacrifices. "Sometimes, Rania," Lucas said softly, "we don't get to choose the path we walk, but we can choose what we do with the steps we take. You've already made the hardest decision. Now you have to trust yourself." She turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet strength that Lucas hadn't seen before. "And what about you, Sergeant Hale? What about you and your people? Are you willing to trust me?" Lucas met her gaze, feeling the weight of her question. It wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about the human soldiers or the alien rebels. This was bigger than that. This was about the future of their worlds, their people, and the fragile hope that peace could still be achieved. "We have no choice but to trust you," Lucas said quietly. "We can't keep fighting forever. It's not sustainable. The rebellion, the war, it's tearing everything apart. I don't want to see more people die for nothing. You're our only hope for peace." Rania looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I will lead. I will do what I can to bring my people to the table. But you must be ready, Lucas. If I fail, the war will only get worse." Lucas didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew the stakes. The next few days were filled with strategy meetings, briefings, and tense conversations with commanders from both the human and alien sides. Rania had insisted on personally contacting the leaders of the rebellion, hoping to end the conflict without further bloodshed. She had made it clear to them that she was no longer the leader of a conquering empire, but a queen who wanted peace for her people. She hoped desperately that they would listen, but it wasn't easy. The rebellion had its own momentum now. There were factions within her own empire that saw Rania's call for peace as a betrayal. They didn't want to listen. They wanted revenge. On the third day of negotiations, Lucas and Rania received word that a fleet of rebel ships was heading toward a neutral planet, one that had been used for peace talks in the past. It was a symbolic location, a place where both sides had once tried to meet and resolve their differences. Now, the rebels were going to use it as a staging ground for their attack. It was a bold move, a declaration of war. The message was clear. If Rania wouldn't lead them to victory, they would fight for it themselves. Lucas could see the strain in Rania's face as the news hit her. She knew what this meant. The rebellion had made its choice, but there was still a chance to stop it. She had to act quickly before things spiraled completely out of control. "I have to go," Rania said, standing up abruptly. "I need to speak with them. I need to show them that I'm not the enemy. If they see me, they might listen." Lucas knew the risks, but he also knew that there was no other option. If Rania didn't try, everything would be lost. He nodded. "I'll go with you," Lucas said. "You don't have to do this alone." Rania looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You've already done more for me than anyone else. I can't ask you to risk your life again." "You're not asking," Lucas replied. "I'm doing this because I believe in what you're trying to do. We all are." Together, they boarded the transport ship, surrounded by a handful of soldiers who had been loyal to both Lucas and Rania. The journey to the neutral planet was tense, filled with uncertainty. Every minute brought them closer to the confrontation that would determine the future of the galaxy. When they arrived at the planet, they were greeted by a warship. The rebel fleet had already begun to position itself in orbit. The situation was far worse than they had anticipated. Rania's people were preparing for a battle, not a negotiation. "We need to act fast," Rania said, her voice low but determined. "If I can't reach them within the next few hours, this will become a full-scale war." Lucas nodded. They had no time to waste. Rania stood at the center of the ship's command deck, preparing to make contact with the rebel leaders. The room was filled with tension, as if the weight of their future rested on every word she spoke. Lucas stood at the back, watching her closely. He knew that this was the moment of truth. She had to convince them that peace was still possible. If she couldn't, everything would be lost. The communication link buzzed to life. On the screen in front of them, the faces of the rebel leaders appeared, hard, defiant, and unyielding. "Queen Rhaenyra," one of them spoke, his voice cold. "You are a traitor. You have abandoned the cause. You speak of peace, but we know what your true intentions are. You want to see our empire fall." Rhaenyra didn't flinch. She knew this would happen, but she had to stay strong. "I am not a traitor," she said firmly. "I have seen the cost of this war. I have lost too much. We cannot continue down this path. We are tearing each other apart, and for what? Power? Revenge? What do we have left if we destroy everything?" There was a long pause, the rebel leaders exchanging looks that Lucas couldn't interpret. Finally, the same leader who had spoken earlier responded. "We have nothing left but the fight," he said, "and we will not stop until you are dethroned." Rhaenyra's eyes narrowed. "Then you will be the ones who destroy our people. You will be the ones who condemn us all to ruin. Is that what you want?" The room fell silent. Lucas could feel the tension crackling in the air. This was the moment. Would they listen? Would they choose to end the war? Finally, the leader spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "We will consider your words, Rhaenyra, but make no mistake. If you fail us again, we will not hesitate to act." With those final words, the communication ended, leaving the room heavy with uncertainty. Rhaenyra stood there, silent for a moment before turning to Lucas. "It's not over," she said softly, "but it's a start." Lucas nodded. There was still a long road ahead of them. The rebellion hadn't been stopped, but it had been slowed. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lucas allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, peace was still within reach, but the war was far from over. And the fight for peace had only just begun.